Hello, everyone. Welcome in. My name is Christy Merrick. I'm the director of the Natural Start Alliance. It's my pleasure to welcome you and thank you for joining us today. Today we are welcoming Claire Underwood. She is a PhD candidate at the University of Cincinnati, and she also is one of the leaders of Natural Start's Graduate Student Network. We're really excited to have her here today to share her insights from a recent national study that she's been working on exploring how nature-based early learning programs are responding to climate-related challenges. This is research I know personally from talking with Claire that she's been working on for many years. So I personally am very excited to finally get to hear some of the results of that work. Nature-based educators are not new to pivoting and adapting in response to weather and the environment. This is sort of an essential intrinsic skill in nature-based education, but climate change really is changing the frequency and the scale of what we're all navigating. So along with, for example, having to quickly pivot on a school day's activities, if a lightning storm comes, now educators are having to navigate maybe dangerous extreme heat conditions, poor air quality as a result of wildfire smoke, and shifting and often unprecedented seasonal changes in weather patterns. These are not abstract ideas. These are concrete, real changes that are significantly influencing daily decisions about things like when to go outside with children, how long to stay out, what safety measures to use, and how to communicate with families and staff. So educators are asking really important questions. They're asking, how do we continue to center joy, exploration, and connection to nature while we're keeping children safe? What routines and policies need to evolve? Where can we innovate in response to all of these new challenges? So today's webinar will draw on a national study of nature-based early learning programs to explore how educators are navigating these realities in practice. I just want to emphasize this is not about fear. It's not about retreat. It's really just about adaptation, resilience, and supporting children to thrive outdoors. And because of the research that she's been doing, Claire Underwood really has become an authority on this topic. So as I mentioned, Claire is a PhD candidate in education at the University of Cincinnati, and she's an instructor in the childhood nature studies and environmental education programs at the University of Minnesota Duluth. Excuse me. Her work sits at the intersections of early childhood education, land-based learning, and community-engaged research. Her scholarship appears in the International Journal of Early Childhood Environmental Education, Children, Youth, and Environments, and Sustainability. And through her work, Claire seeks to support teachers, children, and families in affirming children's agency, supporting their connection to the earth, and working meaningfully together toward a just and sustainable present and future. So again, we're just really excited to hear from Claire today. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to you, Claire. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks, Christy. Thanks for that really warm introduction and grounding for our time together. I'm going to get my slides shared. Let me know if you can see that okay.
Yep,
I
it
think
looks
you
great.
can. Okay, great. So thank you all for being here today. I'm really excited to be sharing my research. Again, as Christy mentioned, exploring how nature preschools are being impacted by and adapting to the climate crisis. So in our about an hour together, we will ground in what we know, the benefits of nature-based learning, as well as the challenges that the climate crisis poses. I'll share findings from the nationwide study that Christy mentioned. I'll offer some policy recommendations and practical strategies, and I'll share some resources. But before we dive into that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about each of you, specifically the role and work that brings you to this webinar. So if you scan the QR code that is on your screen, Emily will also join a link in the chat. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your work. And if you fall in a category outside of these options, feel free to say more in the Zoom chat. This helps us get a sense of who's in the room today. Awesome. I'm excited to see all of these other roles, and then we have nice representation across a spread of work and approaches. And this really illustrates my feeling that we need everyone involved in nature-based learning together to address how these programs are experiencing the climate crisis. We need teachers, administrators, faculty and researchers, policymakers, legislators to all come together to ensure that all children have access to these experiences, which we know can be so beneficial. Alongside that, I want to acknowledge, like Chrissy did, that this can be a heavy topic. And what I want to bring into this space is staying rooted in our love of nature and children, whether it be our content today, adapting to the climate crisis, or here in Minnesota. I would be really remiss not to acknowledge that ice is disappearing my neighbors and terrorizing our communities. And so please keep Minnesota in your heart and energy and take action as you feel called. What we love and what we care for can be really a place of inspiration and grounding. And so I want to take a second for us to remember why we do this work and the power that we have when we come together in community. So in that spirit, I would really love if you would each share a recent nature joy to again call forth the joy, resilience, beauty, and wonder of the natural world. I think this can be a really helpful place to start these conversations, is remembering what we feel grateful for and staying present in this present moment. So what is a recent nature joy or experience that you've had that maybe we can relish in together? I'm here in Duluth, Minnesota, where it is incredibly cold, but we have been getting more snow these past few days, and it is a total joy to watch my dog relish in her snow play and to get outside together every day, even in the very bitter cold. That's been one place of joy for me, as well as catching an absolutely stunning sunrise rather, over Lake Superior, over Gitchigami, where I live on the shores. I'll invite everyone to take a look through each other's nature joys, seeing a snowy owl, enjoying the snow, sledding, sliding, and skiing. Beautiful patterns formed in the frost. Wow. A child saying, "I wish I could be a snowflake." That's beautiful. Spotting two red-tailed hawks, seeing tiny tracks in the snow. Wow. So much joyful winter magic. Thank you all for sharing. I could stay in these observations forever, and just again, really inviting us to take some deep breaths, connect to what we love and to what we know to be the tremendous benefits of our work of nature-based early learning. So we know that this approach has been shown to support children's development across a whole host of domains: children's executive function, their creativity, resilience, and curiosity, their school readiness, and also capacities like perseverance and self-confidence. And I'm sure that we could all name so many more. And a big reason of why I do this work is because of these benefits. I want to ensure that all children have access to nature-based learning approaches. And the challenges that the climate crisis poses requires that we take different strategies to ensure that we really can offer this to as many children as possible. Alongside these benefits, we also know that there are really significant impacts of climate change on young children. Children's developing bodies are more susceptible to poor air quality. They're also less able to regulate body temperature in extreme heat. Children are at greater risk of dehydration as well as injuries in extreme weather conditions. It's also really important to acknowledge that children, as well as adults, in different regions, our bodies respond differently. So in colder regions, we tend to be more heat sensitive than those living in hotter climates, and vice versa. So a theme that you'll notice throughout this presentation and these findings is the need for really regionally specific guidance that takes in the local climate and context and conditions into consideration. There is not a one-size-fits-all response to the climate crisis, particularly when we're keeping young children safe. So this current study asks, how are nature preschools impacted by and adapting to weather-related impacts of climate change? And what do nature preschools need to effectively adapt to those impacts of these climate-related weather events? And the aim is to better support nature-based educators in navigating the climate crisis, to inform policy and create guidelines, again, that are really specific to the nature preschool approach, with the aim of ensuring that all children benefit from nature-based education. So this study was conducted during the 2023-2024 school year, asking teachers to reflect on the prior 2 years. Some of you on the webinar today may have completed the survey, in which case, thank you so much. Your contributions have been incredibly helpful. 84 programs in total were included in this survey. And as a whole, they serve 3,109 children and employ 611 educators. I think that's pretty remarkable. And if we were to compare this map with the Natural Start survey that was conducted several years ago about the spread and population of nature preschool programs by state, it's pretty a similar distribution. So we have representation from across the country of different regions and contexts. 74% of those 84 programs that were a part of the study spend the majority of their day outside, and 70% operate for 10 or more weeks over the summer. The survey asked about 6 weather events that programs had experienced: poor air quality, extreme heat, wildfire, drought, flooding, and other. And so this here, you can see how many programs reported experiencing those events over a 2-year period. So 70 of the 84 programs experienced poor air quality, 59 extreme heat, 48 wildfire smoke, 30 other events, 28 experienced drought, and 21 flooding. You might be curious about what other events were reported. Those included extreme rain, wind, low and no snow winter, severe winter weather, unseasonable warmth, and the opposite, bitter wind chill and cold. You'll notice a lot of extreme and rapid fluctuation. One beach-based program in California reported higher sea levels and erosion impacting their program. So again, I want to emphasize that the nature preschool movement is incredibly diverse, and each program is experiencing these impacts in unique ways in their contexts. But my hope is that this study offers insight broadly into the impacts being experienced and how we can adapt in response. So again, looking at this map of the programs that participated and recalling that we had these 5 events plus others that they were asked to report on, I think this is one of the most shocking findings of this study, is that 65% of programs experienced 3 or more climate-related weather events over that 2-year period. So they may have experienced extreme heat, flooding, and wildfire within a 2-year period. And 90% of programs experienced 2 or more climate-related weather events. So these impacts are varied, and they are often quite intense in the experience that programs are having. Here you can see a frequency of the event that was experienced, which is the most left bar in green. The frequency of programs that spent less time outside as a result, which is this middle in blue, and then those that closed school as a result in purple. So you'll see these responses of spending less time outside and closing school generally track with the frequency of which event was experienced. So air quality, again, was the most frequently experienced and led to the most programs spending less time outside as a result, as well as closing school. I also want to emphasize that nature programs are leading the way. A program in Minnesota created an air quality policy and shared it with other preschool programs in their community before the state offered guidance. They knew that they needed a policy to keep children and teachers safe. They created it and then they shared it with their community. Teachers who participated in this study also demonstrated a remarkable commitment to nature-based early learning despite the challenges that are present. They said that even though we're navigating this extreme weather and challenges around keeping children safe, we know that this approach is beneficial and we're committed to navigating these challenges to ensure that we can keep working in this way. I also want to emphasize that practitioners are incredibly conscientious, experienced, and safety oriented, always prioritizing children's health. And we know that that also includes ensuring outdoor play when it's safe to do so. Again, remembering back to the beginning of this presentation, where I emphasized all of the developmental benefits of time outdoors and nature-based learning and nature play for young children. So now we'll look at strategies and adaptations that were relevant across impacts. So across poor air quality, wildfire smoke, extreme heat, drought, and flooding. Really any context, these are strategies that you can utilize and keep in mind. Mindful monitoring of both child and teacher well-being was incredibly important. This should include physical responses such as flushed cheeks, fatigue, exhaustion, and sweating, as well as emotional responses that might be tied to climate or weather impacts like frustration and irritability. Many teachers reporting adapting their schedule to be outside during the safest part of the day, which is often in the morning. Programs also played in more shaded areas that offered more cooling protection, and then moved inside in the afternoon when temperatures rise. Programs also just needed to spend more time inside. So some programs that would often have snack, lunch, or their rest nap outdoors instead moved those times indoors. Programs also found creative ways to bring nature indoors through process-based art experiences using loose parts, reading nature-based children's books, planting seeds, and finding other creative ways to translate what children were exploring outdoors inside. And this can also include engaging children in documentation activities, which helps to make their learning visible both for themselves and for the wider school community, teachers and families. I want to also emphasize the importance of trusting your intuition and experience. You all are experts of your unique context, environment, and location, and it's almost always better to err on the side of caution, particularly as conditions can change very quickly. It's also incredibly important to communicate with families proactively at the beginning of the year. This can be even before families are enrolled in your program, sharing about what it looks like to be outside every day when it's safe to do so, what climate policies or practices you might have in place, making sure that's included in the family handbook. And then many programs use a what to wear wall that has gear requirements that are in response to real-time conditions that are updated every day. So then rather than having a stringent, this is the gear you're expected across the program, it's in response to real-time conditions. There's a program in Oregon that often required rain gear, but when extreme heat came, they relaxed those requirements so that children were in more breathable clothing that was more appropriate for the weather. Looking particularly at poor air quality, as this was the most experienced event, you might be curious about the difference between poor air quality and wildfire smoke. They're certainly related. In some places, air quality issues are mostly wildfire related. That's in some cases how it is here in northern Minnesota. In other parts of the country, the air quality that they're dealing with is pollution or other issues, not wildfire smoke. But for poor air quality, as a whole, most frequently caused programs to spend less time outside or close their program for the day. Adaptation strategies that programs used included using air filters and fans to filter air indoors, as while it can seem really intuitive to simply move indoors, poor air quality and particles can filter in through windows or cracks in your building or other infrastructure. Programs also masked outside. Teachers practiced more active monitoring of play, again, looking at children's physical responses to see when they might need to come inside for what some programs called a clean air break. Other programs partnered with local organizations to provide an indoor play space, especially for programs who might not have an indoor building of their own. There were some really creative adaptations of working with community centers or museums that might, or be able to, a recreation center that might be able to lend or rent you the space without cost. And that was a really creative way to ensure that the program could still meet and that families could still have the childcare that they depend on. Programs also planned less strenuous activities and limited outdoor time altogether. I want to also emphasize that looking to state or licensing guidelines can be really important, but that teacher discretion is also really important to rely on your expertise and what you're seeing in children's responses. Here is an example of an air quality policy from a nature preschool program here in Duluth. You can see that they have the AQI and the different range, the level of concern, and then they built a policy around that. If you don't have something like this in place, this would be something that would be a nice addition that can help get all of your teachers on the same page and have a way to make decisions. And then again, to communicate that to families at the beginning of the year so that they know what to expect. You can see for this program, they on orange and red days, they encourage children to take it easy and offer more low-key activities while playing outside. And on purple days, they are closed altogether. It's also important to know what symptoms to look for, as I've emphasized the importance of mindful monitoring. So this is a resource from the Minnesota Outdoor Air Quality Guidance for schools and childcare that can help you identify what symptoms might be related to air quality issues and emphasizes the importance of not ignoring symptoms. There are also several air quality monitoring apps that can be helpful. However, teachers reported that it can be really frustrating when people are using different apps in the same exact place, or perhaps even the same application, and getting different results. Only 2 programs of the 84 included in this study had access to on-site data monitoring, which can be really helpful as air quality can vary vastly, even within a small city like Duluth, based on where you are. While it would be wonderful to have air quality monitoring at every site, I know that that is not always possible as they can be quite expensive, but at a minimum, using an air quality app like this and having a process for sharing what you're finding with your teachers and staff can be very helpful. Now looking to extreme heat, ensuring proper hydration is very important, making sure that children and teachers have access to drinking water. Some programs also chose to provide electrolyte hydration options and increasing water-based play as well. A program in Texas also balanced this with keeping conservation in mind. They would fill up so many buckets, and they told the children that once those buckets were gone, that was all the water play, as they were still trying to be mindful about their water use, which I thought was a pretty remarkable nuance to be able to hold. We both want water play so that we can be cooling off, and we're going to be conscientious about the environmental values that we're hoping to instill and not be endlessly running the tap. Can also be a really important budget consideration depending on your facility. Programs also used other cooling techniques like battery-operated fans or cooling bandanas, and taking frequent breaks to ensure that children were safe and comfortable. One program instituted what they call a sit and sip break, where every 20 minutes, they required the children to take a break from their play to rest and rehydrate. Teachers use this time to check everyone's body temperature, including their own. And this allowed them to monitor the children's well-being and to adjust their play plans as needed. It can also be really important to plan to have extra water bottles on hand or a portable cooler to bring out the slip and slide or the sprinkler, again, to try and have this be as playful and fun still for the children rather than stressful, hot, and uncomfortable. Other programs reported spending most of the day in the woods where shade is abundant, and playing in the shade allowed these programs to continue their outdoor play safely. However, even when playing in the shade, teachers should be sure that children take regular breaks for rest and rehydration. One tool that I learned about through this study is the wet bulb globe temperature, which is a really interesting tool that comes from the National Weather Service that takes into account temperature, humidity, wind speed, sun angle, cloud cover, and physical activity to measure heat stress. So rather than a heat index, the wet bulb globe temperature gives a much more in-depth understanding of conditions of heat impact on our bodies. It can be really helpful when shade is limited. And this is a tool that's used in outdoor workplaces and by school athletic programs to determine when outdoor practices can be safely held. Some school districts cancel outdoor sports practice and any other outdoor activities when the wet bulb globe temperature reaches 92 degrees. However, I really want to emphasize that it's important to acknowledge that this guidance was created for high school youth and adults, and further guidance and adaptation of this tool and the recommendations is needed for young children. Still, this tool can be accessed on the National Weather Service website, and there are some mobile heat stress tracking devices that do measure wet bulb globe temperature that allow for on-the-go monitoring, but as you can see, these can be quite expensive and I imagine likely cost prohibitive for many nature preschool programs. Of course, we also want to be familiarizing ourselves with the signs of heat exhaustion. This is an example of a tool that I would recommend including in your handbook or making available for staff, particularly when you are experiencing heat, so that they can know what to be on the lookout for and when to take action. So this is an overview of the strategies and adaptations that I found through this study. And I would love to hear from all of you of a strategy that you use to keep children and teachers safe amidst climate impacts. So you can use that same QR code, or Emma, if you want to share that link in the chat again. Love to hear what strategies and approaches you all are using. Love it. Some misting stations and spray bottles. Great idea. Hydration stations. Adjust the time of day if necessary. Oh, love it. A sip ticket. Children had to show us a big sip of water, and that was their ticket to go outside and play for a bit. A great idea. Going to the stream on hot days. Love this acronym, DEAR, drop everything and rest. A great one. Installing shade rollers and sails. That's great. Water drinking contest. I'm intrigued. It seems like lots of similarities with what I've shared as well. The importance of shade, of hydration, and rest. That feels like a great big three to come back to and rely on. Short lessons on weather helps as well. Yes, we'll talk about that in a little bit, about the importance of acknowledging in a very matter-of-fact and observational way what we're experiencing and how we need to adapt in response. Well, I invite you all to keep adding strategies and approaches that you're using as you feel called. And in the interest of time, I'll keep us moving. I really want to emphasize the importance of flexibility, communication, and adaptation. And those are three qualities and approaches that the teachers included in this study really demonstrated. A tremendous amount of flexibility is needed, like your strategies also suggest, of being responsive to real-time conditions. We know in nature-based learning as an approach that we can have the plan that we think we're going to do, and that often changes. That is even more so the case in the context of the climate crisis. And remembering that we can be flexible, we need to have proactive communication with teachers and families, and that when doing so, we can adapt in ways that still are in the spirit of nature-based learning and keep children and teachers safe. So while I hope that these strategies are helpful, in many ways, I feel like this study is really geared towards making policy recommendations and highlights the need for regionally specific guidelines that really honor and understand the nature preschool approach and the importance of nature-based early learning. Again, nature preschools are incredibly unique. Some are fully outdoors. Some do not have an adequate indoor space. They might not have air conditioning, or simply not be designed for full indoor use. We know how challenging it can be to be in an indoor space that is too small with young children. So guidance that is for traditional schools and school districts is not always relevant or applicable to nature preschools. And as we've seen, climate impacts vary greatly by region. And so guidance for Minnesota would not be appropriate for Texas and vice versa. Nature educators should be consulted in the creation of new guidelines. I really can't emphasize that enough, without carrying the burden, as I know you all already do so much already. My hope with this work is to demonstrate the climate impacts nature preschools are experiencing so that we can together create policies and resources needed to best support you as practitioners in ensuring that children have access to the benefits of nature-based learning. So specifically, my recommendations for policymakers are to put forth policies and resources that offer clarity within a flexible framework. Again, that's based on specific geographic regions and particular climate-related impacts. This phrasing of clarity within a flexible structure or framework came from educators included in this study. That's something that is really challenging, is when there's mixed guidance. Maybe licensing says one thing and the temperature chart says another, and my web app on my phone says something else. How do I make a decision that I know is going to keep children safe? So having clarity while also having flexibility that honors the nature preschool approach. Also, again, emphasizing that educators, nature-based educators, have incredible expertise and lived experience and should be consulted in the creation of these policies and resources. Additionally, there is a real need in the field of early childhood education and early childcare broadly for infrastructure investments. And that is even more so the case, I feel, in nature-based learning, where we are experiencing climate impacts in a different way. So infrastructure investments could look like weather-resilient facilities. Some of the strategies that you all were just naming included installing tents or sails or shade areas. That could be something that could come through infrastructure investment. Creating more climate adaptive playgrounds and nature playscapes that can provide shade, shelter, and biodiversity. There's amazing new research about how these new climate adaptive playgrounds can actually mitigate and create climate resilience that can happen outside rather than just seeing the outdoors as a place of risk. And then ensuring that programs have access to on-site monitoring, particularly for air quality. As I noted before, it can be really frustrating when the air quality app is different. You're standing in the same place as a colleague, you're getting different results. How do we really know what the air quality is and ensure that we're making the best decision that we can to keep children safe? Having an on-site monitor, again, there are only 2 programs out of the 84 in this study that had access to that. That would be a tremendous benefit if more programs had on-site monitoring. So again, increased infrastructure and investment could really facilitate the development and delivery, not only of climate-related policies, but also professional development opportunities in weather preparedness, as well as mental health training. Mostly today, we're focusing on the physical impacts of climate-related weather events, but there are also a whole host of emotional and mental health impacts as well. And these are not things that, to my knowledge, nature preschool teachers and pre-service training are being prepared to do. And this is something that as a field, I feel like we really need to equip and support each other in navigating this very challenging situation. In terms of recommendations for programs, again, the importance of open and proactive communication with your school community, teachers, families, and children from the very beginning. And as much as possible, developing clear climate policies and practices. That could include a what to wear wall that's adapted daily based on real-time conditions, developing an air quality policy, as well as considering using the wet bulb globe temperature policy. All of these slides will also be made available to you if you'd like to draw on the examples and resources shared. Then when it comes to children, as I mentioned earlier, it's really important to take an observational approach and notice what children are noticing and responding to and strive to meet them there. We already do this as a field. That's so much about what nature preschool and nature-based learning is about, is having an emergent curriculum and an inquiry-driven approach that responds to children's observations. We need to continue that in the case of climate change. This doesn't mean that we need to overwhelm children with what impacts we're experiencing, but ignoring their observations and experiences is to our collective detriment. So again, an emergent curriculum is especially important. Teachers shared feeling really frustrated that they might be teaching about hibernation and the animals they were saying were going to hibernate were still out because of these changing climate conditions. And so while certainly challenging, if we are responding to what we're seeing in the moment rather than teaching what we think that we should teach, that is one way that we can be in direct response to conditions and really living into that emergent curriculum approach. Another helpful strategy is narrating what we're seeing, what we're experiencing in a very matter-of-fact way. Sheila Williams-Ridge describes this as developmentally appropriate honesty. So still being honest in a developmentally appropriate way that doesn't overwhelm. So something as simple as it's too hot for our bodies to be outside, so we need to go inside. We need to still acknowledge, to give reasons, to bring children along so that we don't cause further confusion or frustration. And again, we don't need to burden children with the reality of the climate crisis, but we also can't abandon them in their observations of the changes that we are all already seeing to the world around us. And I want to emphasize that children are remarkably capable and resilient, particularly when they're supported by their families, peer, and community. We see this in response to wildfires. With older children, we also see this in the nature preschool approach when we encounter a dead animal and we know that children have interests, we can follow them in that and support them in talking about and understanding death in a way that is really natural and supported. I also want to share an example that looks at this in a little bit of a different way. I've mostly focused on these big climate weather events, a wildfire, extreme heat, a flood. But there are also so many slow onset climate impacts that are happening that you are likely encountering day to day. And a great example of how we can respond comes from Windridge Schoolhouse. Their founder, Laura Whitaker, and I are working on a project documenting how they have worked together, the children and families, to restore their school forest that was decimated by emerald ash borer. So as a school community, they were guided by an Ojibwe family in their program that helped the children decide how to grieve the ash trees that had died and that they had to take down. The children created these hand-beaded necklaces that you can see here, and they offered each stump a necklace, and then each child chose an offering of food. There were some apples, pistachios, and ceremonial tobacco that they offered to thank the trees. Then the children got out their documentation book and with their teacher planned what trees they wanted to order and plant to restore their school forest. And the children and teachers worked alongside each other in planting and tending to these new seedlings. And what was really remarkable was that they also got to witness the natural forest succession that came through as trees emerged that they had not planted. So this is just very briefly, I feel, a really remarkable example of climate resilience that is grounded in community reciprocity and hope, that demonstrates that children notice what is happening to the place where they play every day, and we can walk alongside them in navigating these really challenging circumstances together. So I want to start to wrap up my sharing by emphasizing what educators included in the study wanted you to know when I asked what they would like to share with others who are doing this work. So you can read some direct quotes from them here. And I just want to share that even amidst this heavy topic, there was a tremendous sense of commitment and hope amongst the educators who participated in this study. They wanted to remind you to take care of yourself, to remember the importance of our work and the opportunities that we're providing for children. And this webinar today is a great reminder that we are not alone. We're a part of a broader professional community and movement doing this work together, even though oftentimes we can feel like we're alone in our own program or in our own context. We have a lot to learn from each other, and I'm really grateful for you engaging in this work today. So I've compiled some resources, including articles, online courses, book lists, and other resources that might be helpful to you. And I welcome your additions as well. The commenting feature in this document is turned on. So if there's something that you'd like to add, you can add a comment with a link and I'd be happy to add it. Emily will also include this in the chat. So you have a direct link if you'd rather not use the QR code. And then as we wrap up, I'd love to hear from you one thing you're taking away from our time together before we move into a few minutes of Q&A. So this could be something that stood out to you, something that you're wondering about, or one way that you might apply what we've discussed today. Mm-hmm. Thanks for these reflections. Absolutely, we need leadership buy-in. And we also have a lot of tools to succeed. I'm so glad that you enjoyed the Windridge example. I'm very interested in collecting other stories of how you all are navigating this in practice and how we can share those to offer inspiration and ways to navigate this. Mm. Yeah, I really appreciate this, legitimizing that climate change is affecting nature-based preschools and elevating that it's on the mind of educators. That's absolutely one of my hopes for this work, is that it's really created a baseline, kind of a snapshot in time of what we're experiencing. And really my greatest hope is that more support and resources for our work together can come through these findings. Yeah, people care and caring goes a long way. That's exactly right. Well, I really appreciate these responses and ideas, and thank you for sharing the strategies that you're using. I love someone's takeaway is the SIP ticket and deer were great ideas. I always learn something through spending time with other nature-based practitioners, and just really, again, want to thank you for the wonderful work that you do, for being here and being part of this webinar, to Natural Start Alliance for inviting me to share this work, and to the University of Cincinnati Research Council, who provided the funding for this study. I've also provided my contact information, which you're welcome to use. I would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was absolutely fantastic. You were probably busy talking and
I could
sharing.
not see
I could
anything.
see the chat, but so much appreciation being shared there. Really fantastic. Also, I just want to highlight that there were some really wonderful resources that folks shared there, and you
Great.
shared your list of resources. Just want to say that we will collect all of that. And when we post the recording, we will make all of that available on the page to make sure that everyone can access that going forward. And I think that you mentioned that you'd be willing to share your slides. So
Yes,
if that's the case, then we'll also post the slides there on that page also.
yes, I will. And the slides will include all of your responses, which is really fun. So, yes.
Terrific. Thank you. And I also just wanted to highlight, speaking of resources, that Natural Start has published draft recommendations for licensing nature-based preschools. And I'm going to just pop that link in the chat. And it does address some of the pieces that you talked about here, with recommendations around weather, air quality, things like that. So we would really welcome everyone's feedback on that. I thought that it was really interesting that you mentioned how difficult it is to have a one-size-fits-all approach, and the challenge
Yeah.
of creating a framework that's really useful and actionable for folks, but also allows for the flexibility. There was a comment in the chat when you were talking about the temperatures, and somebody said, well, we live in Texas. It's like over 90 degrees most of the time.
Right.
Like, would this apply to us? And I thought it just really highlighted that point that you made, that is very context dependent.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Um, I was just sort of thinking when I was seeing some of the recommendations and the strategies, that really, nature preschools are so much on the front line of early childhood
Yeah.
programs navigating climate change, because we spend so much time outdoors. We're like a little bit of a canary in a coal mine, I feel like. We're experiencing it
Mm-hmm.
first and most. But at the same time, we are also best prepared. We are
Mm-hmm.
the
Yes.
experts to lead the field, really, of early childhood
Yeah.
education and how to adapt, because we are expert at
Yeah.
navigating outdoor learning and navigating, weather and climate. Um, so I thought that was, it struck me as I was listening, that boy,
Mm-hmm.
we're both the most impacted and the most prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to emphasize that we're prepared, that we have strategies, that sometimes we will need to come inside or spend less time or close school, but by no means should any of this be taken to say that we shouldn't be bringing children outside. We know that we need to, that they need it, that we need it as educators. And like you're saying, Christy, that I think we will be able to offer guidance for other programs who maybe don't have the nature-based approach or haven't used that in the past.
Yeah, like you mentioned at the beginning, all of these incredible benefits of spending time outside is
Mm-hmm.
also it's also a risk to children's health not to go outside.
Exactly.
So
Yep,
we
that's
have to
right.
find a way through. I was sort
Mhm.
of happy to see that school closures was not a very common outcome. Like, sometimes,
Yeah.
for whatever the situations were, it was the best choice for
Hmm.
programs, but not very common. And I
Yep.
think going forward, as we're navigating this, that is going to be our mission, to really minimize school closures.
Hmm.
so that we can offer that stability for families, that weather is
Exactly.
not going to cause school to be closed. But I was curious if you heard anything in particular from programs about having to take that action.
Yes, I think that there is this constant struggle of wanting to provide consistent care for families. And so wanting that to be a last resort, though sometimes, like you said, that it really is the safest option. But yes, I'm also heartened to see that in a lot of cases, that wasn't, the most frequent approach. And again, it's really dependent on the kind of indoor facilities that a program might have. So that seems to be the most important determining factor is are they able to have their program run indoors all day?
And I thought it was interesting. I think you mentioned that it doesn't necessarily mean it's a permanent indoor space. Maybe they're
Right.
partnering with another organization or something in order to have a plan for days when they need it, but otherwise it's not a space that they're regularly using.
Yeah. So again, a lot of creative adaptation possibilities. It doesn't mean that you have to create a permanent indoor space. There might be a community partnership that would really love to have your program come and be in their space.
Mhm. We had a question in the chat. Someone wanted to know if this is the only study about how nature preschools are affected by climate change. Have there been earlier studies or any comparisons across time? Are you aware of other research in this area?
Mhm. To my knowledge, this is the first study of its kind of looking at direct impacts. There's some really nice articles about how teachers are navigating or working directly kind of in their program, but not taking a wider view of how our programs across the country. So my hope is that this creates a baseline for us that then we can do some comparisons, but there is not anything to compare it to my knowledge.
How about that?
How about that?
You're leading the way. Um, that's great. I'm trying to scroll through some of these. There's people is continuing to share resources. Oh, I thought another
That's
interesting
great.
comment in the chat, and then you addressed it later, that someone said that they're working to help programs increase shade, both with
Mm-hmm.
long-term options like trees, but short-term like shade sails, etc. This is something that I hear a lot when we talk about infrastructure. There's a lot of emphasis on sort of physical and like things you can buy or bring in.
Yeah.
But with our nature-based approach, of course, we love a solution that is more nature-based. So I was
Mm-hmm.
curious how like what the balance is that you saw in programs between kind of physical purchased infrastructure versus the possibility for more nature-based possibilities like trees.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't collect data on that specifically about the difference between those. I would be curious though if programs might use things that they purchase for an immediate solution while also working to do planting for more long term. And ideally, if there was investment and funds to be able to do both side by side. I also think the example from Windridge is really remarkable of seeing that forest grow in a much shorter time than was originally imagined, and for little bodies that don't need very high to have a nice shaded canopy.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think a lot of folks would like to hear more about the Windridge example. That was so inspiring to folks.
Yes,
It's really
hopefully
fantastic.
that will be published soon, and I will certainly share it. And it's a beautiful story, and I think an example that we can learn a lot from. Particularly, it wasn't the focus of the presentation today, but how they worked with the indigenous families that were part of their program and in our community to be guided of how do we really offer thanks and be in reciprocity with this forest that has held the children, and how can we restore it together. And it's been really, really beautiful what they've done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're coming to the end of our time, Claire. I
Yeah.
wondered if you wanted to share just one last quick parting thought before I go through a couple of quick announcements here at the end.
Yeah, someone made a really nice comment along the lines of like, we're doing great work, and you really, all of you are. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of it and to do this work alongside you. Please reach out, and I just look forward to continuing to share and to be a part of this wonderful community.
Oh, well, thank you so very much. We really appreciate you being here. We appreciate the work that you've done. Like you highlighted, this hasn't been done before. It was so, so needed. And like we were talking about, I really am so glad to highlight the expertise of our field and the people who have been doing this work for so long and helping us sort of lead the way in how we continue to let children play and learn outside, even as our climate is changing. So thank you, thank you, thank you so much, Claire. And then I just wanted to share a couple of quick announcements before we part ways. We're going to continue exploring this topic of navigating the changing climate with another webinar next month to follow up on this conversation. In February, we will be welcoming Ariella Cook-Shonkoff. On February 24th. She is a psychotherapist and author of Raising Anti-Doomers: How to Bring Up Resilient Kids Through Climate Change and Tumultuous Times. And she'll share how educators can support children's emotional resilience and move beyond denial, doom, and overwhelm toward hope, agency, and meaningful engagement. And I think, Claire, you might have mentioned that a lot of times educators don't get specifically training in this area. So we're hoping that will help move us along on this journey. So you can learn more about that upcoming webinar at naturalstart.org. And maybe, Emily, you could pop the registration link in the chat for folks who want to go ahead and register. And then another announcement, just a reminder that we are heading to San Antonio, Texas this summer for the 2026 annual Nature-Based Early Learning Conference. It'll be taking place this year at the end of June. We're usually in July. We're moving it up to the end of June. And there'll also be an online option for folks. It's going to be a fantastic 4-day event in partnership with our friends at the San Antonio Zoo and the Will Smith Zoo School. And registration should be opening at the end of next month. So we really look forward to seeing folks there and continuing, again, more of these conversations as we explore all of this. And with registration opening soon, we are welcoming conference sponsors. Sponsors receive a variety of benefits and they can connect with nature-based educators from across the US and beyond. So if you're interested or you know of an organization that might be interested in being a sponsor to support nature-based education, you can learn more at conference.naturalstart.org, and you can email us always anytime at info.naturalstart.org. So that's it for us for today. Thank you again, Claire. It was absolutely wonderful to have you here. So inspiring, and we're excited to learn more as we continue to explore this area. So thank you so much, everyone.